Welcome to GRE. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold, talking about the real crash in real estate and why we're looking at a 60% drop, the fact that rental bidding wars are now heating up. Then the guys from Wealth Without Wall Street join me as we talk about why and how trying to be debt-free is a losing game for so many people today on Get Rich Education. You know, a lot of investors choose either cash flow or home price appreciation, but one real estate market could provide both: Jacksonville, Florida. They've got 27% lower home prices and higher rents than the national median. Their market has appreciated 34% more than other comparable cash flow markets over the last 30 years. Get positive cash flow today and above average appreciation for tomorrow. They often have available inventory in Jacksonville, if you can believe that. Start at cashflowandgrowth.com.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to GRE, from Florida's Lake Okeechobee to Georgia's Okefenokee, across America and 188 nations worldwide. You're listening to one of America's longest running and most listened to shows on real estate investing, economics, and wealth mindset. This is Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. We'll talk about what's happening with renters in just a moment. But you know, people still ask me, how in the heck did this epic housing price run-up happen during a recession? Well, first of all, in the latest Federal Reserve numbers, you'll see that year over year, the median sales price of existing homes has risen from $294K to $363K. That is a 23.4% gain. And yes, there are factors like historically low interest rates there, and pandemic-driven supply chain bottlenecks, and surging regulatory costs, and higher inflation. They are all strong contributors to that. But let's keep it simple. The epic housing price surge really all comes down to three immutable economic value drivers: scarcity, utility, and demand. That is your short answer to the question. So let's look at each of these. The first one, scarcity. Understand, this is a housing supply crash, not a price crash. America had already seen decades of underbuilding leading into the pandemic. The number of homes for sale, that has declined annually since 2014. Home building slowed. Fewer people want to be a carpenter. Fewer people want to be a laborer or a framer or a cement mason. Well, prior to the pandemic, 1 or 1.5 million homes were actively listed for sale at any given time. I've mentioned that before. This year, it dropped to a paltry 500,000 only. Well, that sharp 60% drop is a crash. Virtually no economist or industry expert out there believes that supply is going to be ample enough to meet demand for another decade or more. Earlier this year, the NAR estimated that America is undersupplied by a whopping 6.8 million homes. So the scarcity is stark. So the second of these three immutable economic drivers is utility that's driving this torrid price run-up. Now, utility means usefulness. Well, how could housing possibly get any more useful, really, between, say, 2019 in 2021? How could it get more useful? After all, a home already meets your most basic and non-discretionary human need of shelter, along with food and safety. But a pandemic soon meant that the home truly became the center of your world. In 2019, a home is where one ate and recreated and slept. But now, on top of all those things, it also serves potentially as your workplace, and your Zoom conference room, and your gym, and your homeschool for kids that are at home more often now. And people are more likely to grow food in their home now. So it also might be your garden patch or where you have your greenhouse. people became more independent in just 2 years' time. And that fundamentally changed the home Americans interact with, that real estate that you interact with. So fundamentally, its utility, its usefulness increased. So that is scarcity and utility, which drives point number 3, which is demand. Greater utility gave birth to heightened demand. That's what led to bidding wars. America's population keeps growing by 1 to 2 million people per year, although it did step back with smaller population growth last year because of what happened. But all these extra people need to live somewhere. And then you have millennials that are piling on as well. They are the largest generation in American history. They're about age 25 to 40. And many of these 72 million people are just reaching their prime home buying years. So real estate has all three: scarcity, utility, and demand. And understand that an asset does not even need to have all three of those drivers in order to be valuable. For example, the air that you're breathing right now, that is so valuable that you would die without it in a few minutes. Well, here in the atmosphere, air is not scarce at all, but yet it only has two of these value drivers, utility and demand, where real estate has all three: scarcity, utility, and demand. Nonetheless, property prices cannot continue this rapid growth indefinitely. They are soon going to be slowed by either affordability constraints or more people deciding to list their homes once they feel that home shoppers are not going to infect them with the virus. But scarcity is going to remain the most persistent of those three value drivers. Of the three, scarcity, utility, and demand, scarcity, that's the condition that is just going to continue to linger. And that's because solving this supply crash problem requires more than just people going in and building homes. You just can't do that. See, thousands of local jurisdictions, they need to evaluate land use restrictions and zoning laws and building requirements just to ensure that home construction is encouraged rather than discouraged like it has been. And that right there, all those jurisdictions doing that, that makes for a really long road in curing that scarcity condition. So property is going to keep appreciating at elevated levels for three reasons: greater scarcity, greater utility, and greater demand. So the real crash in real estate has already happened. It is a supply crash, not a price crash. And what do I mean by elevated levels when I say it's going to appreciate by elevated levels? Well, the NAR, they're going to tell you that the long-term appreciation rate of housing is something like 6% per year. And I am planning on it appreciating at levels greater than that through the end of this year and into next year. When you look at the percent of a household's expendable income that one spends on housing, it is still not historically high. So there is some more room for price growth. But yeah, not this 23.4% for much longer. That is not sustainable or even healthy. Now, note that what we have here is not only a shortage of available housing for sale, it's also available housing for rent. This is a housing shortage overall. And then you've got the lingering eviction moratorium playing into this too. In fact, CNBC's Diana Olick was just reporting about this. Just listen to this. It is 2 to 3 minutes in length, and I'll be right back to comment.
Demand for rentals is now off the charts, both apartments and single-family homes. That has landlords seeing bidding wars and dollar signs normally reserved for home buyers.
We've been leasing property for almost 20 years, and we haven't seen an applicant pool this competitive since we've started.
Vipin Motwani put this Clinton, Maryland townhouse on the rental market just a few weeks ago and had 20 showings and 10 offers. Potential tenants are offering several $100s a month over asking price, and landlords are following suit. In July, rents nationally rose 7% year over year for one-bedroom apartments and 8.7% for two-bedroom apartments. That's up from 5 and 6.5% annual gains in June. That's all according to Zumper. Now, for single-family rentals, the latest read from CoreLogic in May, May shows rents up 6.6% year over year. That's nearly 4 times the annual increase in May of 2020. Not only is the rent rising, but so too is the profile of today's renter.
The rental applications that we're getting right now, you're seeing higher credit scores, you're seeing applicants willing to put down more in terms of security deposit. You're seeing strong rental history as well. That wasn't necessarily the case pre-COVID.
He's seeing a lot of renters who were trying to buy homes but were priced out and decided to rent instead. With home prices still skyrocketing and the supply of homes for sale improving only very slightly, there's unlikely to be any relief for renters anytime soon. Dom?
All right, so this is fascinating to me because, I'm a landlord myself, and so I kind of follow these dynamics. How exactly, though, is the eviction crisis that we're talking about right now playing into rents and competition for homes and apartments? We've heard a lot of stories about landlords not liking the fact that these eviction moratoriums are still in place. They are trying to take advantage of some of these rent markets, if you will. What exactly is the dynamic there?
Well, it's really supply and demand. If you have renters who aren't paying the rent and you can't turn over that property, that's taking out of that supply that you need for all those renters coming in who do have the cash to pay. And you have also demographics coming in, millennials and other people who are moving out of their parents' homes. The job market is getting better again, so they want places to live. So there's so much demand out there and so little supply. And of those renters who aren't able to be evicted right now, those landlords can't turn over those properties to new renters. They have less supply. More demand just means higher prices.
Of course, it's a very tough spot for a lot of renters out there for sure.
See, as home prices rise and it gets harder for that first-time home buyer to buy, well then what do those people have to do? They have to become your renter or stay your renter. This is an overall housing shortage of both for-sale units and for rent units. Yes, you can actually play both sides of this because you chose to invest in an asset class that pays you 5 ways. So it's the lack of homes for sale that helps you on the appreciation, and then it will take some time for it to catch up, but the upward pressure on rental demand then helps you on your cash flow. That is the temperature of the real estate market for property owners, buyers, and renters. Let's talk to the guys from Wealth Without Wall Street. Hey, well, the guys from Wealth Without Wall Street are here today. Russ Morgan and Joey Mure practice and teach others a number of financial freedom strategies, including short-term rental property. Russ achieved his CFP designation quite a few years ago. Joey spent 11 years in the mortgage business. Today, they'll tell you that the Wall Street mindset really separates families, entrepreneurs, and business owners from their money, while others use it to their advantage. Russ and Joey, welcome to Get Rich Education.
Man, so glad to be here, Keith. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us on the show. Glad to spend some time with you today.
Well, you guys have a good following. In fact, our own operations manager here at GRE, Andrea, she's followed you for quite some time. Talking to you guys and thinking about the concept Wealth Without Wall Street, it makes me think about the story when the Wall Street money manager brings his new client down to the boatyard. And the Wall Street money manager is showing the client the yachts in the boatyard. Well, here's this money manager's yacht, and here's that money manager's yacht, and here's my yacht. And the client says to the Wall Street money manager, well, where are all the clients' yachts?
Exactly.
So they're not there. So the moral of the story is Wall Street makes virtually no one wealthy other than themselves. And if you don't become a direct investor, you're going to lose.
That is so true. I haven't heard that analogy, but it is so true that we invest in Wall Street. We provide all the money, input, risk, and get about 20 to 30% of the profit out as well. They get the rest of it, and they get to keep it for the longest period of time. That's so well said.
Well, if you think about it, it's one of the greatest marketing schemes of all time. They have convinced us, and when I say us, John Q. Public, to give them our money, take all the risk, and defer our own lives so that they can create the biggest profit of all time and then give it back to us in the smallest amounts possible as we try not to run out of money before we die. Like, it's brilliant. It's just not our strategy, it's theirs.
And I think it works for Wall Street because much of their income comes from employee 401ks and similar sort of retirement plans. And that employee kind of has their head down in their work and their business, and they don't understand what's going on. Tell us some more about something that a Wall Street money manager, Joey and Russ, would probably object to. The investor only keeps 20 to 30% of what they put in, or 20 to 30% of the profits, or tell us more.
What you're explaining there is that ultimately it's an accumulation approach, right? We're told that we need to have $2 or $3 million in a 401k account that would allow us to then retire. But what Joey was explaining there just a second ago, we've interviewed him, and I'm sure you've done some reading and maybe even interviewed him as well. But Dr. Wade Fowle, he's a doctor in retirement income. He was the one did a lot of the research behind the whole 4% rule, meaning that you could take out 4% out of your investment account over a period of 20 years and have a guarantee that you would have at least $1 left in it. That accumulation approach is what most people are following. Oh, I need to be putting money away. I got to store it here. And then I get to $3 million. Then I can take out $120,000 a year. And that's what I'm going to live on. Now, they forget that $120,000 a year in 30 years isn't worth a fraction of what it is today, right, mostly because of the printing presses that the government has created. But also, what are they doing? They're deferring all the enjoyment, and they're forgetting that their kids are growing up right before their eyes. They're becoming depressed, if you will, through that whole process. And what ends up happening is most people never reach the point of, quote, retirement, because they don't reach the amount of money that they need in an account. And we follow the same advice that you do, that financial freedom is when you have more passive income than you have monthly expenses. And that doesn't require a certain amount of money in the bank. That just requires more passive income than you have monthly expenses. It requires you to educate yourself. I love your podcast, right? It's education. It's meant that the best investment one could make is in themselves. Unfortunately, we're taught that we shouldn't do that. We should defer that over to the other guys. They're smarter. They went to school specifically for this financial education. And then, like you said, what they end up doing, they divide us from our money. As we know, we're not direct investors. We're investors typically in mutual funds, which then there's all these people, but they have to get salaries between us and the end result. Well, once all those salaries come out, all those fees come out, yeah, it's about 20 or 30% of what the real profit is.
It's often about building a stream of income rather than a pile of cash. That's the big mindset shift for a lot of people. And a lot of people are conditioned to delayed gratification. Now, I think there's something to be said for delayed gratification, especially perhaps earlier in one's life. But I don't know if that's the right mindset to have too far into life. If you're not building income streams, you probably are delaying gratification. You've opted into a salary reduction plan, which is what 401ks effectively are. In fact, that was an early name of 401ks. And really, the question I think that one needs to ask themselves is, when does delayed gratification in life become denied gratification in life?
That is right in line with what we talk about is a scarcity mindset is what is driven by this accumulation strategy. I remember very clearly about a year ago, my family and I went to the beach. And we were there for a week, and we got to know some of the neighbors that were there just for the week. And this older lady, she just was seeing me and my 5 daughters, my wife. And of course, we had our Wealth Without Wall Street swim gear on, like our shirts. And so she's like, "Oh, what's that about?" She came over, and she's actually from about an hour from where we live. So that was kind of also interesting. We were 6 hours away from home, and we were really close to where they were. I told her a little bit about what we do and what our whole idea is. And she said, "I retired recently. I just hope it's enough." I said, "What do you mean by that?" She said, "Well, we spent our whole lives putting away money into these retirement plans. I just hope it lasts." It was one of those things. It's kind of like, I know this to be true, but to have somebody physically in front of me verbalizing it, it was so real to me. It was like, she literally has lived scarcely her whole life. And now she's living scarcely in the time that she's supposed to be free. Retirement is the promise of freedom, and she still can't live freely because she's worried that it may not have been enough.
Well, your point there, and I think this is what you were talking about a second ago or alluding to, Keith, is that how can we do something over and over and over for 30 or 40 years and expect to change at some point in the future? Like what they say, typically a habit is ingrained after 28 days of doing something. So if we're delaying gratification in whatever that area is, right? A lot of people say, oh, well, I'm going to live way below my means. You know, we're not going to take vacations. Or if we take a vacation, we're only going to take a small vacation once a year. But when we get to quote unquote retirement, that's when we're going to travel the world. We're just going to travel. It's like, no, you're not. That's a lie.
Don't lie to yourself.
You have ingrained this mindset into yourself for 30 years. And then all of a sudden you're going to like throw that to the wind. You're going to do completely the opposite thing. No, you end up being a person who lives in scarcity in retirement. And so you start thinking, right? The biggest fear someone has. So you've mentioned in my bio that I used to be a certified financial planner. I would sit down with people, and that would be the biggest concern that someone over the age of 60 would have is I just hope that my money doesn't run out before I die. So they're always thinking that way. So then they're going to start, we don't need to go on that trip. You know, that would have been fine, but we don't need to do that. I know we said we're going to go to Disney with the grandkids. No, we don't need to do that. They're not going to live differently in retirement than they live today. So someone who spends all their money today is going to spend all their money in the future. Somebody who saves every dollar they have today is going to want to save every dollar they have in the future.
Those are so many great points that you bring up there. And it's the whole hope is not a strategy mantra. And the way to really create certainty in your future, rather than just hope, is to build those income streams throughout your life, because that's what one's going to be dependent on. You guys are such experts at really breaking down what Wall Street does to people and almost fleeces people with in the process. Can you tell us some more about those fees and how that degrades one's profits? For example, some investor might look and think, well, my money manager's not taking too much from me. I can see right here that I only pay a 2% fee per year. How can they be taking such a majority of my profits over time then?
What I would say to that, and there's all those statistics, you can go on the internet and say, hey, what does a 2% fee ultimately reduce an account over time? It does. It becomes 6-7 figures, Keith. It is kind of sickening to think about it. And to be honest, we used to have those discussions with people because we would say, hey, here's Willie Wall Street, as we would nickname him. And look at how bad Willie is. He's taking
Willie.
He's taking all this money from you. And here you are doing all the work, all the heavy lifting. What would most of the time happen is if you really liked your financial advisor, your certified financial planner, or whoever you were working with, you would say, no, but they care about me. We're buddies. We play golf. We go to church together, whatever it may be. They're taking care of me. What we realize is that people, regardless of what the reality was, were dealing with their finances from an emotional standpoint. And so what we learned and what we share today has little to do with Wall Street. To be honest, we bring it back to the individual. I was having a conversation just earlier today. A friend of mine is an attorney, said, hey, I really want to meet this nurse practitioner friend of mine. I know your company coaches people on processes. Would you mind having a quick conversation before you introduce her to maybe one of your coaches? I said, sure. I asked her, what is it that you want? Because that's the question we're always going to ask people.
Yeah.
What is it that you want? And she said, I want to sit on the couch. I was like, well, I know that that's not actually the case. The reason I know that because you're such a successful entrepreneur, because she had created a whole practice and had been super successful because my friend had been sharing all of this stuff with me. Some of the things she was starting to invest in. I was like, I doubt that's what you want. But it probably feels like it today because you probably feel the world of burden with all the things your business is putting on you today. And that would seem great. That'd be an ideal day, but it wouldn't be an ideal lifestyle, would it? If you had to do that every single day for the rest of your life, you probably wouldn't want that. She says, well, no. I was like, so what do you want? She says, well, I just want more time. I go, exactly. So where have you been putting money up to this point? She goes, we've been maxing out 401ks and IRAs. Well, I don't have to go into the fact that 401ks is a bad place to put money because of the taxation, because of the mutual fund investing and all the money the Wall Street managers. I don't have to do that. I have to say, when do you want to be financially free? And she says, as soon as possible. She was in her probably 40s. And I was like, okay, so you don't want to wait 15 years? She said, absolutely not. I cannot wait that long. I go, great. Well, let's find a way then to create cash flow from a completely different source that can help you become financially free so you can get more time with those kids that I see the pictures behind you on the wall. And she goes, that's what I want. Really, when we break it down, people really want more time freedom. They want more time with the people that they love to do the things that they love, whether it's climbing mountains or whatever it is. How much money is coming out of their accounts for Wall Street fees is irrelevant. How much taxes are going to be in the future going to deplete most of the accounts that people believe that they have in 401ks is irrelevant. If the thing that you're doing is not getting you closer to financial freedom today, then it's in direct conflict with what you want if what you say you want is to be financially free.
Yeah, there's no competition at that point. Again, Russ said we used to make it about fees and the differences and all that kind of thing. But if it's just a point of this is not going to get you to financial freedom and this will, there's just a clear leader at that point.
401ks tax people at a rate twice as high as if they would have just invested outside of their 401k, in a sense, because upon retirement, one needs to pay ordinary income tax on their gain, where if they would have just invested outside the plan, they could pay long-term capital gains tax, which is at about half the rate of what ordinary income tax rates are. So many people don't understand that. And yeah, it's so interesting, Russ, when you talk about that client that you met with, a lot of people are so used to suppressing what they really want and delaying gratification so much that you need to work and pull out of them really hard what they really want because they're so used to burying that down deep because it seems unrealistic to them. We're talking with Russ Morgan and Joey Mure of Wealth Without Wall Street. We're going to come back and talk more about how chasing zero debt never gets you anywhere. You're listening to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Hey, is your IRA in a real estate syndication? Yikes, a 37% UBIT tax could hit you, but you still have a chance to set up your EQRP and avoid this. Did you make too much money in 2020 and need more deductions? Now federal law lets you set up an EQRP in 2021 and get deductions for last year, retroactively. Even put old IRA and 401k money in Bitcoin, gold, or your own business. Get control of all of your retirement money, tax and penalty free. Text EQRP in all capital letters to 72,000. The people that our listeners can't stop talking about are Ridge Lending Group, NMLS 42056. They've provided GRE listeners with more loans than anyone, and it's where I got my last few loans. They finance single-family income property up to 4plexes. They're the #1 lender for beginners and veterans. Start your pre-qualification, chat with President Chaley Ridge personally, and get your custom plan for expanding your cash-flowing portfolio. Start at ridgelendinggroup.com.
This is author Jim Rickards. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold and don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. We're talking with Russ Morgan and Joey Mure from Wealth Without Wall Street about financial freedom, how to really get there, what you really want in life, and how oftentimes the ordinary playbook just suppresses what one even thinks that they want anymore because they told themselves that they can't have it. I think one misguided strategy that, my gosh, this is so antiquated, but you still hear about it over time, is that people have a desire to be debt-free. I don't know if that's what one really wants, but they think that that is the path to take them where they want to go financially. I'm known for saying financially free beats debt free. And I know that you two often talk about how chasing zero debt never gets you anywhere. Tell us more.
Well, I think a lot of people are chasing zero. They are literally trying to get back to zero, meaning that they went to school, they got student loans, right? The first thing they did once they got out of college was buy a car on debt. And then they bought a house and then they continue to live their life. And so they believe that my goal is to get back to zero. So they end up trying, as you said, chase zero debt. And the whole time, as we've all experienced in our life, something comes up. We're constantly getting into a position. There's an age-old movie called Cool Hand Luke. Most of your audience probably have never watched it. Is it, Paul Newman movie from like the 70s. And there's a scene in there where he's a prisoner and one of the wardens is making him dig a ditch out in the yard. And the goal was to basically break him, right? And so he's digging this ditch and he spends the whole day digging it. And then as soon as he feels like he's finished the change of the guard, and one of the guards comes up and says, "Why'd you dig a hole in my yard? Fill it up." And he makes it filling back up. Well, he spends the whole night then filling it back up, change of the guard, and the original guard comes back and said, "I told you dig a hole." What we find is that that's what people do with debt. They literally spend their whole life trying to pay back the debt that they dug from the beginning, but ultimately taking out new debts over time while never building assets and cash flow. For us, we're telling them you can't pay off lifestyle. Passive income greater than monthly expenses is financial freedom. And we gave this example the other day in our audience, and it had some aha moments for people. Keith, if you had $500 a month of passive income and you had $5,000 a month of expenses, you'd be 10% of the way to financial freedom. True?
That's right.
Well, so let's just sit there and do the math and say, well, let's assume that I had some money and I could use that to pay off a car note. And let's assume the car note was $500 a month. So if you took the $500 off your car note, now you have $500 a month of passive income, but now only $4,500 of monthly expenses. You follow me?
Yep.
Well, how close to financial freedom are you based upon that? You're a little bit closer, right? You're 11%. You went from 10%.
You went up 1%.
You went from 10% to 11% of the way there, because all you have to do is take the passive income and divide it into the monthly expenses to determine how close you are. But let's just assume that because you're listening to this podcast, you're listening to Keith's advice and other guests, and you find an asset that would produce $500 with the same amount of money that you would have used to pay down the car, pay off the car. So you will go from $500 a month of passive income to $1,000, but yet you still have the car note, right? So your expenses are still $5,000. How close to financial freedom are you now? Aren't you 20% of the way there? So just that focus, people understanding that, wait a second, paying off debt doesn't necessarily get me. It can get me a little bit closer, but is it the most efficient? And for us, tracking those sort of things, being very practical in that application to understand who we are as investors. Robert Kiyosaki, as you know, is famous for saying there's no good or bad investments, only good or bad investors. And most of the people are not good investors because they don't even know who they are as an investor. But yet they think, well, the best thing for me to do is pay off debt because I'll immediately free up that cash flow. I'll immediately get rid of that interest rate. But it's like, is it the best thing? Maybe, maybe not.
And it boils down to, Keith, is education, in my opinion, is the difference, which is why I love being on your show, is you are constantly providing this education that we don't get anywhere else. It's not like this is just readily available in the school systems by any stretch. It comes down to that if I don't have any education about where to create passive income, then the only option I have in my mind is I just have to pay off debt. It's simple. It's, linear. It's like, hey, I have $1, I can pay this off. Or if I save up enough, I can pay this off. But they don't ever zoom out and say, but what is actually going to get me financial freedom? I still have the cost of living. In that passive income greater than monthly expenses formula, the monthly expenses is not just debt payments. It's power bills, medication, gas, food, all those things. You can never pay those things off. So if you make your whole life, and we see this, think about generations ahead of us. They're in their 50s and 60s. They've done all their life. They've done this. They've dug a hole, paid it back, dug a hole, paid it back. And they look up and they say, now what? I still have all these other expenses, but I have no money coming in the door passively. So I guess I'm just going to have to keep working. I guess I'm going to have to just put more money away. I'm going to have to scrimp and save more. And they've missed the picture of having their money work harder for them through these passive income sources. And so we want to challenge that. And by the way, one last thought on debt that I'll mention. It really comes down to we're not saying don't ever pay off debt, because there are some debts that are keeping you from financial freedom. You just have to know how to prioritize them. If you're listening to this and you say, well, yeah, Joey, Russ, sounds good, but there are debts I feel like I need to pay off in order to be financially free. You may be right. We actually created a tool that helps you prioritize those to see what it is I need to do first, second, third, or if they're in a zone where it's really not as important to pay it off, I know it because I've used a tool to help me be objective and not just emotional about that debt.
Yeah, that could help because I think one chief reason that people want to be debt free is that they can see that monthly recurring debt, even if it's only 3% interest rate auto debt. So therefore, it becomes very easy to want to stamp that out and hammer that out. But they're not aware of what's unseen, which is the opportunity cost of investing in a vehicle like you and I favor, real estate, where you might get a return of 10 to 40%, and the arbitrage created by investing in real estate at, say, a 15% return minus the 3% debt that you're still paying, and the ability to create 12 points of arbitrage right there by striving toward being financially free rather than being debt free. And in today's environment, a lot of people are borrowing at arguably less than the rate of inflation. So if one advances principal pay down, they're actually diminishing their prosperity on their way to trying to be debt free. It's just not the right target.
Sometimes it can be confusing, Keith, right? I mean, you and I and Joey spent a lot of time investing in real estate, investing in businesses, investing into our IQ, right? The old age proverb was, if I give me an hour to cut down a tree, I'd spend 55 minutes sharpening my axe.
Right.
I don't think a lot of people think about that as their financial IQ that needs to be sharpened, but it gets confusing. We use words like interest rates. We use words like arbitrage that prevents us from being able to make a decision. Ultimately, financial decisions should be made from, if I have $10,000, $100,000, what income could this produce if I bought an asset? What debt would it free up from a cash flow standpoint if I paid it off? And they can see that very visually. They don't have to get confused in the whole interest rate or the arbitrage of it. I mean, for instance, but it goes back to who you are as an investor. Joey and I, we own a lot of different short-term rental units. And what we have learned, because this is an area that fits our investor DNA, we love running businesses, we love influencing businesses. We've created over 20 of these units, and we can put in $10,000 to $15,000 per bedroom and kick off about $700 to $800 a month net cash flow after all expenses paid. That includes the management of it. If I've got $10,000 that I can kick off $800 a month, and I have $10,000 and I can go free up a $300 a month car payment, as you said, I'm losing $500 a month if I go that route. And so for us, it was understanding, how did we do that? How do we create the ability to know how to do it? And sometimes people have to go and invest in themselves. They have to go get that education so that they can learn how to do it.
Financially free beats debt free. A lot of people don't build those habits that create passive income throughout their lives, and then they don't have substantial passive income in retirement either. And then when it's time to retire and they're older and it's almost too late to do much of anything, when they didn't build passive income streams, they soon come to realize, oh, even if I got debt free, I still have ongoing expenses in retirement, from groceries to utilities to vacations I might want to take now that I've worked so hard for 30 to 40 years, and I can't do that because I don't have substantial passive income streams to offset that. I've gone as far, Joey and Russ, of saying that, think of one's mindset this way. In your investor life, if you have $10 million in debt, that's actually probably a wealth marker. It's not a poverty marker, because to have $10 million in debt, you must be pretty financially savvy. You must be pretty credit worthy to even get $10 million in debt, oftentimes where the payments can be pretty reliably outsourced to something like a tenant. So you want to get into a lot of the right kind of debt.
You just want to be educated, right? I've said this several times. There's conversations out there, is there good or bad debt? And I don't believe there is. I think debt, like most things, is from the perspective of the individual dealing with it. The person that you're describing who has $10 million of debt, most likely because they got to that position, have created many assets, and it became at a very sophisticated knowledge base of what they were doing. There could be someone out there that could get into $10 million of debt. We could probably point to a lot of celebrities, right, who got to $10 million of debt and they were buying junk. The same $10 million of debt could be good or bad based upon the perspective. Somebody could say, well, credit cards is bad debt. I could say, well, I know people who've used credit cards to create wealth in their life that they would have never been able to create if they didn't have access to those credit cards. So there's not even a type of debt, I think, that can even be said good or bad. It's what you do with it. As Kiyosaki says, it's more important to understand who you are as an investor than the investment or even the debt.
Yeah, I've referred to the person that's $10 million in good debt with that debt outsourced to tenants as the debt decamillionaire. And you may very well want to be one of those. But yeah, there is the wrong kind of debt as well. But the savvy debtor that's the debt decamillionaire with $10 million in debt might have 20 or 30 or $50 million in assets. The difference of those two being one's net worth, of course. Joey, you mentioned a resource, a tool where one can really see this in black and white and help them make better decisions, especially as it pertains to financially free and debt free. Tell us about that.
So we, within our 3-step process, we take people through first their own financial passport challenge. That is, we mentioned before that people have unknowingly kind of suppressed their own goals for financial freedom because they don't even want to believe it's possible. And what we realize is that they needed a tool. They needed something to help them think about who do they want to be, what do they want to do, and what do they want to have when they are financially free. It's not something that you just happen upon a hope strategy to become. You have to be thoughtful about it, and you have to put your own personal spin on it. You can't borrow someone else's financially free mindset. It has to be yours. So we built a passport challenge. It's a free challenge within our community that we'd love for people to enter in and join us in. And the second step in that, and you can do that by wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/passport, by the way, and become a member of our community and join that. Within that second step of our process, we call it the Pathfinder. You learn what sort of investor you are by taking an assessment of who you are. And in that same course, you learn how to prioritize your debt. So we have a priority payoff guide that you enter in your own information and it tells you, is this in like the danger zone? Is it in the caution zone or in the freedom zone? And if you have all your debts lined up in the freedom zone, it really informs you to take these steps towards now, okay, there's probably better use of this money than paying off this debt that I could create freedom with on the passive income side of things. And so it's just a way to keep it objective instead of emotional, which we find that a lot of people deal with debt emotionally. And in that vein, they miss their opportunity, their window towards financial freedom because they get focused in on the wrong thing.
Yeah, well, I encourage you checking that out and making this more real at wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/passport. Yeah, it's been a great chat. Russ and Joey, thanks so much for coming on to Get Rich Education.
Thanks, Keith, for having us on.
Yeah, and by the way, when you join the community, DM us in the app because we'd love to know that you heard about us here on Keith's show. That's where we connect with people individually. So love to see you in there.
Yeah, I like how Russ talks about chasing zero debt. People aren't building wealth when they're doing that. And then Joey talking about paying down debt while you're working. Well, you're still going to have expenses in retirement. So you need to set up those income streams. And what is bad debt? Well, it's a lot of things. Often it's debt that cannot be outsourced, or it's debt that has no collateral attached to it, meaning that it's unsecured, like credit card debt or maybe a payday loan. Now we look at the good debt side. If you have debt that's at a lower interest rate than the return you could get from an investment, that qualifies. And some of these are situational because look, if you have an automobile loan at a 3% interest rate, okay, there is collateral there. But if you know how to invest for, say, a 20% total return in turnkey real estate, well, then you really can't afford to pay the car loan down or pay it off at 3% because instead you could make a 17% spread or 17 points of arbitrage by investing in real estate, earning the 20% and keeping that 3% car loan on, and instead using those funds that you would have used to retire the car loan to make a down payment for real estate. And conditions that might change that are, you understand you need a sufficient cash flow to offset the car payment, because if equity accumulates in your property, well, that doesn't help you service the car debt. And another example of how that's situational is if your 3% interest rate car loan has, say, a $500 payment, well, some mortgage loan underwriters might look at you and they're going to tell you that you have to pay off your car loan to knock out that $500 payment, because you need to decrease your debt to income ratio for the lender. Good debt is debt that can be outsourced to tenants, and also debt that's at a lower interest rate than the rate of inflation. And then when you're weighing your debt types, there's also whether or not the interest is tax deductible, like it could be with student loan debt, which can lower your effective interest rate then. Yet student loan debt typically can't be written off into bankruptcy, so that one is pretty sticky. I think the real lesson is that often debt pay down is not the most effective way to be financially free. Big thanks to two quality guys today, Russ and Joey. Great chat. wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/passport. For our operations lead, Andrea Newbern, content manager Matthew Blunt, sound engineer Bidran Jampa, web designer Nikon Roy. We'll see you next week. Until then, I'm your host Keith Weinhold, and I am so grateful for your listenership. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.